Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 631. My opponent kicked off with d4 here, and I played knight f6. And after he played c4, I decided to try and go for a Nimzo Indian with e6. I also played g6, the idea of getting to a Grinfeld, but this is an interesting way to play that. The Nimzo Indian is one of my main defenses, but he avoids it by playing knight f3, which you see is very popular. So I go for the Queen's Indian. You can switch back to Queen's Gambit declined with d5. You can play Bishop b4 for the Bogo Indian, but my fallback has usually been the Queen's Indian, and a very solid defense for black, and actually has seen a comeback recently, so they've started playing this again at the top levels. It's funny how these things come and go. It was out of favor for quite a while. Okay, let's see. White continues with g3. That's the main move here. And now I do this funny bishop dance. This was, you could just play bishop b7. You can see that's the second choice here, and there's nothing wrong with it. But bishop a6 is like a little bit of a finesse. Get the bishop out here, put some pressure on the pawn, and ask him how he wants to defend it. And if he defends with b3, which is a normal move, then you throw in the bishop b4 check. And then he blocks with the bishop. That's the normal move, and then you just retreat. This is kind of funny bishop dance, but the idea is that the bishop is blocking the queen from defense of the d-pawn, so maybe that comes under fire, and the bishop will have to move again to get deployed onto this diagonal. I think that's the main idea, is that you're causing the bishop to waste some time, basically, because it has to move again to get on to the diagonal. And then he played bishop g2, and I just went bishop b7. So it's interesting, I wasn't aware that the main move here is c6. You have to do something about this diagonal, and bishop b7 is logical. And it's a fine move, so it's nothing wrong with it. But just to look at the main line for a while, you play c6. It's kind of interesting main line. Then he can reply bishop c3, getting the bishop on this diagonal. That's what I mentioned. And now c6 is prepared d5, so you get that in. And this line continues for quite a while. Let's see, there's one more point I wanted to get to here. Yeah, it's right here. You don't play with this knight to d7 because he can take on c6. So you have to avoid that. So, but in order to get rid of this knight, you really want to challenge it, or at least have the possibility of playing f6 if he doesn't move it. So knight f to d7 is the main move here, and then white usually takes, and then develops his knight. You can castle here, and white castles, and then rook to c8. So it seems like you get pretty decent development. You're still going to probably have to deploy this bishop at some time, although, you know, it is doing kind of a useful job here. It's looking at this pawn, and if that pawn moves, it's looking at the rook through those pawns. So it exercises some kind of restraining influence out here. And you've got the rook off the diagonal, so it doesn't matter if this diagonal opens up. And white usually continues with e4 here, just trying to blast open the center. Let's see, did I continue any more? And I think e4 is where I stopped. So e4, I guess one point is it's not so great to take here. You're kind of helping white out by opening up that center. You'd rather white took, and you took back with a pawn, and you had a solid formation here. So playing c5 or b5. b5 looks like an interesting choice here, trying to force some exchanges in the center. And white continues to avoid exchanges by playing a piece move. And now eventually you give up and play d takes e4. Anyway, that's the main line here. I played bishop b7. Oh, we're still in the opening book here, so let's keep this up. He castled. I castled. And he went knight c3. And now I went c5. So c5 is a bit of a rare move. The main move here is knight to a6. And yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of the move I don't usually think of, but the knight is looking at a couple of squares here, and maybe knight a6 prepares c5, because then you can take back with a knight if he exchanges. After c5 right away, white does have the option to push on with d5, and that is, I think that turns into a pawn sack, because I have two pieces on that and he only has one defender, but it gets complicated, and that would be an interesting way to play. Okay, but that's outside the game. He just took. I take. And all this keeps some kind of opening edge for white. So I'm going to fast forward through the next few moves. This is a long game, and it was pretty close, so there weren't too many mistakes in it. There was just a couple points where one side or the other could have gotten the advantage. So let's step forward to the next critical point. So I think all these moves are kind of logical. I don't want to allow the pawn structure damage here. I didn't want to allow that pin on the knight forever. He eventually trades off the knight. This is okay. And I push on with d5 to keep his knight from hopping into the d6 square. So all this was approved. The chess engine liked the d5 move, and it liked this exchange. I would prefer to keep material on, but I guess I don't have a good way of avoiding the exchange. I didn't see it during the game, and the chess engine didn't find anything there either. So all this stays in the range of slight opening edge to white. And then right here, knight f4. This is the first point where white gives the advantage away, and so I have some interesting ideas at this point. He could have played queen d3. That's the chess engine recommendation. Queen d3, and then I go g6, opening up a square for my bishop and blunting the queen on that diagonal. He has that light squared bishop, so maybe a good idea to try and keep it from getting too active there by controlling some of those light squares. Rook to c1, queen to d6, getting on the dark squares, and h4. So that's just how the engine wants to play. There was no big plan that I could discern in its movements, but it is keeping the knight there and keeping my pawn restrained. So after knight f4, I have the possibility to push that pawn forward and dissolve the weakness, and that leads to an equal game. So he basically gives up the opening advantage. But I had an even better move here. If you want to pause the video and think about it, see if you can spot it. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. It's whenever you have the bishop pair, it's an idea to keep in mind that sometimes a rook can be dominated. So if you look for a rook that has some open diagonals towards it and a limited number of squares to move to, you might notice this bishop a6 move, and the rook has nowhere to go. If the rook goes to e1, you've got bishop to c3. So white doesn't have control of these key squares, and that just wins the exchange. Let's see, after bishop a6, the chess engine wants to sack the exchange this way. Knight takes d5, bishop takes, king takes, and then queen to d6, defending the bishop. So if he takes here, there's no pawn damage. And this is, well, black is up the exchange, white has a pawn for the exchange. So black is better here from a material point of view, although it's not clear if that's a winning advantage. But anyway, certainly that's a way to play for an advantage. I just pushed on with d4, and this leads to an equal position after the center, the isolated queen's pawn is dissolved. Let's see, he traded bishops first. I took with the rook so as to force his queen to move, gains a tempo. Then I went g6 here. I didn't want him making threats, and I also wanted to open up a square for my bishop. I'm taking a square away from his knight and giving my bishop a retreat square. Let's see, he pushed on with h4. I went h5 to block it. But here was a second chance I had to get some kind of edge in this game. Not a big one, but just a little bit of something. Queen d7 is the suggestion. Queen d7, and the threat is just to bring the rook down here to the 7th rank. So the queen drops back. I will still come in here, and I've got something. I have maybe possibilities of getting the bishop or another piece on the 7th rank. He could probably trade it off, but it's a little bit of something, I guess. The engine is recommending h5, which I didn't really understand at all, but I guess the chess engine did not like giving up the 2nd rank. And then it shows this crazy line where black sacks the exchange. Black sacks the exchange and comes in with this check. And after king to the h file, picks up a pawn with check, and actually likes black in this position. So either of these ways would be something of a slight edge for black. Anyway, the way I played h5, it just stays pretty even. And let's go forward. There's another block of moves where it just stays in the range of even, so we're going to kind of fast forward through these moves. We get into the endgame after the queen trade, And yeah, I guess both sides are playing the endgame well. There's nothing much going on, and I'm holding on to my pawns, and he managed to create a pawn weakness here. I didn't, sometimes the bishop has an advantage against the knight in a position where there's pawns on both sides of the board, but I could not find a way to exploit it, and the chess engine didn't see anything great there either. It's this move c4. So I played, the chess engine is recommending a4 here, and it just stays absolutely even. But after c4, there actually is an interesting chance for white here. And of course I had calculated this, but it's an error in my calculation. So he took, if he takes, this is the line I had to calculate before playing c4. I was thinking this is just good for me because I'm quicker to this side than his king is to this side. But there's a wrinkle here. So let's do a few moves. These are takes, takes, takes. So in this position, let's see, it's white's turn to move, and I figured 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get the king out of the way, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to queen. And for me, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 versus 10. I queen a whole tempo early, and I have time to stop his pawn. But there is a way for white to play better and gain one tempo. So let's watch how the engine does this. King to f4. This is all according to what I was planning or calculating. He goes king to c3. I go king b2. It takes. All this is all according to plan. I take, and then he doesn't take the f pawn. He takes the h pawn. And so I start pushing my pawn, and then he doesn't step his king out of the way, but he just starts marching the g pawn. And so somehow this gains him a tempo. So you have to calculate this out, but you'll see after the trade, I keep pushing, he pushes. His king doesn't have to get out of the way. I guess that's where the tempo went. And after he played g4, I'm sort of obliged to take that. Well, he can keep marching anyway if I don't take it. So, yeah, I think the key point is that he didn't have to waste a tempo getting the king out of the way. So let's see, I have to step somewhere. He pushes. And I still queen first, but I'm only one step ahead and not 2 steps ahead. So he gets to queen. And now there's a position where the queens are on and white has the pawn. It could still end in a draw. There's no way of knowing. The chess engine did not find a win. It just gives a steady evaluation of +1, meaning white has an extra pawn. So probably with the open king, there's good drawing chances. Although in a blitz game, there's certainly good winning chances for white as well with the extra pawn. Anyway, so that was the last key critical moment in the game. He just played rook d2. And of course, a calculation like that would be pretty difficult to find. But it's nice to know that, let's back up here. I mean, I did that calculation before pushing on with c4, which you're obliged to do. If you see there's a way to go into that king and pawn endgame, you're obliged to calculate it out. And usually it's a pretty simple matter of accounting. It's not like it's a huge task to calculate that. But sometimes there are those little tricks. So grabbing over here and pushing the g-pawn is an interesting concept. Okay, let's see. I pushed on with c4. He played rook to d2. And we trade rooks this way, and this is just a complete draw. So I'll just step forward through to the end of the game. There was just no way to make any progress here. So we marched around, did a little dance with our kings for a bit, and then agreed to a draw here. So interesting game. Hope you guys like this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon.